Here on the Colour of Country Life Flow FM, we're catching up with Andrew Weidemann. He's a farmer at Rapanya, also on the Grain Producers Australia board. Andrew, how are you going, first of all?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Ricky. And look, the season at home, we're getting quite wet at the moment. We've had another 16 mil of rain again only yesterday, and that's on the back of a 20 the week before. So it's consistently each week we're getting, some reasonable rain events, which is going to put a bit of pressure on for managing fungal diseases and that as we head towards the finishing end of the season.
Yeah, what have you got in the ground yourself out at Rapanya Way?
Yeah, so look, we're a typical Wimmera farmer. We've got wheat, barley, canola, lentils, faba beans. We also run some livestock as well. We've got a white Suffolk stud, a small white Suffolk stud, which we sell prime lamb size to people from.
Yep,
yeah.
No, that's good stuff. And you've had to watch those rainfall readings from afar because your other sort of hobby, if you like, is being involved in Grain Producers Australia. You're over in Canberra. I think I've caught you on the road around Beaufort Way on your way home. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Ricky. Yes, I know we were up in Canberra yesterday and we were in a Senate hearing last night on biosecurity. So, and of course, I think Parliament shut down, unfortunately, due to the passing of our Queen.
Yes, I think they're not going to have sittings next week either. So I guess you got your evidence in while you could. It would have been highly inconvenient to go all that way and not actually get a say. But when it comes to your involvement in Grain Producers Australia, you've been involved for some time, I gather.
Yes, look, I'm the last director of Grains Council Australia when it was named Grains Council Australia, but it's the same organisation, and I've been involved in agricultural politics since about 2003. It's been a 20-year serving of trying to do the right thing for farmers and try and make sure that the industry is going to be better when I leave it.
Well, with that length of experience, you're probably a good one to give us a bit of a breakdown on this report that came out on Thursday from the ACCC on regulation of grain ports. Give us the background picture. Why are we looking at this topic?
Yeah, so look, I was heavily involved in this with the deregulation of the industry back in 2008. Access to the ports infrastructure was one of the key aspects of deregulation to try and make sure that we had an open and transparent marketplace and the ability for other traders to be able to use the assets essentially at port to export the grain out of the country. Now, in 2012, the inception of the Wheat Port Code sort of took shape, I suppose, and from there we've had varying reviews of that code over the journey. Now, when we were negotiating the Wheat Port Code, obviously all the farmer listeners will realise that we actually export more than wheat, although wheat being the major crop for Australia meant that everything was focused around wheat, and because of the fact that it was a deregulation at the time of the Wheat Marketing Act, that wheat was unfortunately the only grain that was used in that Wheat Port Code as the example where we realistically, and I think as the ACCC report that's come out yesterday, it's identifying the reality that we can see that we need to have access for other grains in that as well.
Yeah, so this is, I guess, as we go along the journey with regard to Australia being an export-oriented nation when it comes to grains and other agricultural food and fibre. What is this report really saying to us from the ACCC? Because they're indicating that, among other things, exporters generally support regulation of bulk grain export supply chains, but port terminal operators don't. What's the reason for the tension there?
Well, look, it's a competitive environment. There's no question of that. And in a deregulated market, I think, most of the asset holders wanted to have it so that they were the sole users. Now, if you are holding assets by the water and you're the only exporter, and if all you were doing was operating as essentially a bulk handler and you didn't have a marketing division, we wouldn't have to have the Wheat Port Code. But because we have holders of the major assets for exporting grain out of Australia, as well as having a marketing arm, which in most cases are now all as one, then that's created a tension because other exporters obviously are buying grain and want to take grain out of Australia. We've seen over the last probably 5 or 6 years now where we've seen the likes of Reardon Grains in Victoria, Semaphore Grains in South Australia, Teaport's obviously just recently announcing their situation in being able to offer an alternative pathway to market for a lot of farmers. And that's the important thing that we've been looking at. And so while the industry is still developing and still investing in those types of assets and opportunities, we still need to keep a level of regulation, which is what the exporters are saying, on the current asset holders of the major infrastructure for exporting of grain out of Australia.
Yeah, we bring a report on our Market Day edition of our Country Viewpoint program after 12 noon each Friday, and the comments started to come up quite regularly about how South Australian growers seem to be getting a premium just at the moment, and a big reason for that is the ability to move grain out from the competing ports there, whereas there's been a sort of observation that the competition level just hasn't quite been there on the East Coast, and maybe that's even playing a role in why there's so much still being held back.
Well, look, there's no doubt that getting grain to port's probably a bigger infrastructure issue to us at the moment. With the ability for us to have the assets used fully and at peak times, we've got to make sure that we've got grain at that port situation. So we've got some blockages in terms of freight transport, availability of transport up country, and then getting it to the export ports themselves. But look, South Australia is probably a very unique case where you've got quite a few ports that are actually on the water and right next to grain growing areas. Certainly other parts of Australia are not quite so fortunate, and there's always a transference of freight to get a lot of grain to port from a reasonably long distance.
So I guess when we look at, the headline of this, what the ACCC put out, record grain harvest exposed issues, are we just having some teething problems because we've had a few very good years on the land and possibly, fingers crossed, a good one coming up? Are all these issues going to dissipate once we have, I guess, more regular size harvests?
Well, look, the system is actually being tested now fully for the first time since deregulation, because we've had so many dry years in the last decade. We've never really got to the point where we've had back year-on-year surpluses of grain being held in storages and up country. So we're actually now, it's the decade on from essentially deregulation. We're actually finally getting to a point where we're really testing the system like, what we saw back in the 80s and early 90s when we were getting regular season crops. We didn't have the impacts of droughts and large frost events that were causing us so much disruption in production. So now we're actually really in a vein of testing that supply chain fully. And year on year, we're now starting to see some of the issues bubble to the surface, and a lot of frustration because we're talking about high-value grain crops trying to get out into the marketplace globally. There's a lot of other pressures on, as we know, overseas that are impacting global prices. So a lot of people want to ship quickly because they don't want to hold the grain at a higher price value and then ship it into a lower market value. So there's always that tension around, can we do this, can we do that in any market? But at the moment, the ones that are critically holding those port assets are the biggest gatekeepers to the marketplace.
Well, I guess in the context of the current war in Russia-Ukraine, we've seen how one blockage in the form of a blockade of Ukraine ports in the Black Sea can have massive effects on the global market. What role does rail, I know Murray Basin rail be pretty close to your heart in Victoria, what role does rail and good freight mean in terms of having diverse outputs for which ports we can reach?
Well, look, it's interesting this, and we've been working closely here with the Victorian Farmers Federation in Victoria at the moment, actually looking at that Murray-Darling Basin rail, which looks to have fallen over to a large degree, which is really unfortunate because just for the sake of funding and getting things rolling. Within your 300-kilometre radius of a port, generally a lot of truck movements will occur. But once you get outside of that, rail is super important to be more effective and more efficient way of moving grain, taking more trucks off the road. And I think, with the current discussion around sustainability and carbon and all of these things, and trying to make the industry more efficient and more long-term sustainable, then rail obviously has a major impact in doing that, to take more trucks off the road and lessen the cost on energy requirements to move grain. Because at the moment, the energy requirements to move grain is far greater than it probably ever has been, just due to the nature of the rail system being unable to cope.
Yeah, we're about to take a hit on fuel excise as well, with that coming off very shortly, which is going to be a challenge in terms of the energy cost when it comes to the fuel for the prime movers.
Yeah, absolutely, Ricky. Look, it's going to, and of course, on top of that, we have the issue about labour force. I mean, we've got probably an ageing truck driver situation, and we don't have that generational change of people coming into the industry and helping to support it. And it doesn't matter whether it's trucking or manufacturing. That's labour is having probably a far bigger impact on the efficiency of our industry as well than we probably recognise at the moment.
Yeah, good point. Now, just last question about Grain Producers Australia. What's the position now on what inquiries or other investigations are needed? The ACCC claims that there are calls within the industry for a broader grains market inquiry. Is that where the Grain Producers Australia is at?
Yes, look, absolutely. It was a key cornerstone of our election policy this year, going into the current election, and we got a commitment from the Labor government to take a serious look at that. And of course, being in Canberra yesterday, again talking with the parliamentarians there, so there's quite a huge focus on that at the moment. But obviously, we've had some biosecurity concerns, which is taking up a lot of government's time. Working through the FMD and the lumpy skin issues. But, once we get the government more stabilised, the new government, I should say, in their thinking, then I think we'll start to see some outcomes. But, yeah, we've been long-term calling for an inquiry to give the ACCC the right powers to be able to investigate properly where there's been the potential for, unfortunate trading activities, I'll call it. And we had a survey that we did. We did a project study last year that identified some key points in that, and we've obviously provided that to the Minister as a basis for asking for the review of the industry, and it's a good health check. And in a lot of ways, as I've tried to explain it to people, you can take a look under the hood, or you can actually change the oil and filter on the motor, and hopefully you'll get a better outcome and more longevity out of the car. So it's the same thing with the industry. It's taking a really good look and then hopefully set the industry up for the next 10 years. And in this process, we'll also find where all the blockages points are for greater investment, like rail, like we were just talking about on rail, but also where we can talk about better facilities, more as in time, as in need, like the semaphores, the T-ports and the Reardon equation that have developed up those as in time needs as well to help the industry with its export requirements.
Well, Andrew, I know you've got to get back in the car. You stopped for us at Beaufort. Appreciate that. Let you get back to the farm. Thanks for joining us today on Flow.
Yeah, no worries at all, Ricky, anytime, and good luck to listeners. Let's hope that, we get another good year in the bank, because obviously with input costs rising as they have, we wanted to try and make sure we maximise this year's grain pricing and try and maintain some level of profitability, which, everybody's striving for.